The cart came careening down the hill with no driver at the reins, its wheels shrieking protests against the rutted dirt road. And Freya Rowan had exactly 3 heartbeats to realize it was not going to stop before it plowed straight through the western fence of her pasture, splitting rails and scattering splinters across the grass like someone had taken an axe to kindling. The goats, her beautiful, prize-winning dairy goats that she had spent 2 years breeding to perfection, took one look at the gaping hole in their enclosure and made a collective decision that freedom was far more appealing than staying put, streaming through the gap in a bleating, frolicking wave that spread across the valley in every conceivable direction. Freya stood there with a bucket of feed still in her hand, green-skinned and slack-jawed, watching her livelihood vanish over the hillside. And then she heard the groaning and the cursing coming from somewhere behind the overturned cart. She set the bucket down very carefully, rolled her shoulders back, and marched toward the wreckage with the kind of determined stride that usually preceded someone having a very bad day made significantly worse. The man who crawled out from behind the cart was dusty, bruised, and looked like he had recently made several poor decisions in rapid succession. He was tall, maybe just over 6 feet, with dark hair that stuck up at odd angles and a face that would have been handsome if it were not currently smudged with dirt and twisted into an expression of profound resignation. He looked at the broken fence, then at the distant goats, then at Freya, and his shoulders slumped in a way that suggested he had been expecting this kind of disaster all along. "You broke my fence," Freya said, her voice flat and dangerous. She crossed her arms over her chest, and her small tusks caught the afternoon sunlight as she tilted her head. "So you owe me a husband." The man blinked at her. Then he sighed, long and deep, the kind of sigh that came from somewhere around his boots and carried with it the weight of 1,000 small disappointments. "I suppose that is fair," he said, which was not at all the response Freya had been expecting. She had meant it as a joke, mostly, the kind of sharp-edged jest you threw at someone who had just destroyed your property to make them squirm a little before you demanded actual compensation. But he was looking at her with those steady, dark eyes, and there was no laughter in them, no mockery, just a sort of exhausted acceptance that made her feel like she had just accidentally agreed to something she did not entirely understand. "I am joking," she said, a little less certainly than she would have liked. "Obviously. You owe me a fence, not a marriage." "I will fix your fence," the man said. He bent down to pick up one of the broken rails, turning it over in his hands as though assessing the damage. "But if you want a husband as well, I suppose I can manage that too." Freya stared at him. "Are you making fun of me?" "No," he said simply. He set the rail down and looked at her again, and there was something in his gaze that was entirely serious, entirely sincere. "I broke your fence." "You are right. I owe you a debt. If you say the debt is a husband, then that is what I will give you." "That is insane," Freya said. "You cannot just agree to marry someone because you wrecked their fence. That is not how anything works." The man shrugged. "I do not have much else to offer. No money to speak of, and it would take me months to earn enough to pay for the damage and the lost goats. A husband, though, that I can provide immediately." He paused, then added, as if it were an afterthought, "My name is Owen Naylor, by the way." "Freya Rowan," she said automatically, because her mother had raised her with manners even if this entire conversation had left those manners somewhere back near the wreckage of her fence. "And you are either the strangest man I have ever met or the most committed to a very stupid joke." Owen looked at the scattered goats again, then back at her. "I am not joking," he said, "but I understand if you do not want to hold me to it. I will fix the fence either way. It is the least I can do." There was something about the way he said it, calm and matter-of-fact, that made Freya believe him. She found herself nodding before she had fully thought it through. Fine. Fix the fence. We can discuss the husband part later, assuming you have not died of stupidity by then. Fair enough, Owen said, and he actually smiled a little, just a quirk at the corner of his mouth that softened the hard lines of his face. Freya spent the rest of the afternoon chasing down goats, cursing the entire time, and when she finally got the last one penned in the barn for safekeeping, she came back to find Owen still at the fence line, pulling nails out of splintered wood and sorting the salvageable pieces into neat piles. He had taken off his jacket despite the autumn chill, and his shirt was damp with sweat, and he worked with the kind of methodical focus that spoke of someone who was used to long, hard labor. "You can stop for the day," Freya called out as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. "It is getting dark." Owen looked up and there was sawdust in his hair. "I will be back tomorrow," he said, "to finish." "You do not have to," Freya said, though she was not entirely sure why she was giving him an out. "I was not serious about the husband thing. You know that, right?" "I know," Owen said. He picked up his jacket and slung it over one shoulder. "But I am serious about the fence. I will see you tomorrow, Freya." He walked away down the road, limping slightly, and Freya stood there in her ruined pasture and wondered what in the name of all the spirits she had just gotten herself into. Owen came back the next morning just after dawn, carrying a satchel of tools and a serious expression, and he set to work on the fence without a word. Freya brought him water at midday, and he thanked her quietly and drank it down in long, steady gulps, and then he went right back to hammering rails into place. "You do not talk much, do you?" Freya said, sitting down on a nearby stump to watch him work. "No," Owen said. He lined up another rail, tested its fit, and nodded to himself before reaching for a nail. "Is it because you do not like talking, or because you do not like me?" Freya asked. Owen paused, the hammer halfway to the nail, and he looked at her with those dark, steady eyes. "I like talking fine," he said. "I just do not have much worth saying most of the time." "That is a terrible philosophy," Freya said. "Conversation is about more than just saying important things. It is about connecting with people, getting to know them." "Then ask me something," Owen said. He drove the nail home with 3 precise strikes, and the sound echoed across the pasture. Freya considered him for a moment. "Why did you agree to the husband thing? Even as a joke, that is a very strange thing to go along with." Owen set the hammer down and wiped his hands on his trousers. "I have been a soldier," he said. "Fought in the border wars for 6 years. When you do that, you learn that debts matter, honor matters. You broke something, you fix it. You owe someone, you pay them back. It is the only way to keep yourself human when everything else is trying to make you into a monster." Freya felt something twist in her chest, something that was not quite pity, but was definitely softer than the irritation she had been nursing since yesterday. "You are not a monster," she said quietly. "No," Owen agreed, "but I have been close enough to see what it looks like. So when you said I owed you a husband, even as a jest, I thought, well, that is a debt too. And maybe it is not the worst debt to have." "You are definitely the strangest man I have ever met," Freya said, but there was no heat in it this time, just a kind of wondering curiosity. Owen picked up his hammer again. "You are not the first person to tell me that." The fence took 3 days to fully repair, and Owen showed up every single morning without fail, working from dawn until dusk, and by the end of it, the fence was not just fixed but better than it had been before, reinforced and sturdy and built to last. Freya found excuses to be outside while he worked, bringing him food and water and asking him questions that he answered in his short, careful way. And somewhere in the middle of the second day, she realized that she was enjoying his company, the quiet steadiness of him, the way he listened more than he spoke and considered his words before he let them out into the world. "It is done," Owen said on the third evening, standing back to survey his handiwork. The fence ran straight and true along the pasture line, and the goats were back in their enclosure, grazing peacefully as though they had never staged their great escape. "It looks good," Freya said. She walked along the fence line, testing the rails, and they did not budge under her hand. "Really good. You have a talent for this." "I like working with my hands," Owen said. He started packing up his tools, slipping them back into his satchel one by one. "It is honest work. You can see what you have done at the end of the day." Freya watched him prepare to leave, and she felt something like panic flutter in her chest, which was absurd because she had only known this man for 3 days, and most of that time he had been fixing the fence he had broken. But the thought of him walking away down that road and not coming back made her feel strangely hollow. "The gate is still a little shaky," she said quickly, before she could think better of it. "I mean, it works, but it could use some reinforcement if you wanted to come back tomorrow and look at it." Owen looked at the gate. It was perfectly fine. They both knew it was perfectly fine. But he nodded slowly, and there was that little quirk of a smile again. "I could do that," he said. "I will be back tomorrow." He came back the next day, and the next, and the next, and the excuses got progressively flimsier and more transparent. The gate needed a new hinge. The corner post needed to be reset. The entire western section could benefit from a second rail for extra stability. Owen went along with every single one, showing up each morning with his tools and his quiet competence. And Freya stopped even pretending that she needed the work done, and just started spending the days with him, talking while he worked, learning the careful, deliberate way he thought about the world. "I think I am falling for you," Freya said one afternoon, about 2 weeks into this strange, unspoken arrangement. She was sitting on the fence, watching him plane down a rough piece of timber, and the words just slipped out before she could stop them. Owen stopped planing. He set the tool down and looked up at her, and his expression was unreadable. "You said the husband thing was a joke." "It was," Freya said. Her cheeks felt hot, which was ridiculous because orcs did not blush, except apparently they did because she could feel the blood rushing to her face. "When I said it, I meant it as a joke. But now I think maybe I actually meant it, or maybe I mean it now. I am not sure. I am making a mess of this, aren't I?" "No," Owen said softly. He climbed up onto the fence beside her, moving carefully, and when he sat down their shoulders were almost touching. "You are not making a mess of anything. I think I have been falling for you too. Since about the second day, when you brought me lunch and stayed to eat with me instead of going back inside." "Then why did you not say anything?" Freya demanded. "Because I am a man who does not have much to offer," Owen said, and there was an old pain in his voice, something worn and familiar. "I have no land, no money, no family to speak of. I am a former soldier with bad dreams and a tendency to break fences with runaway carts. You deserve better than that." "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard," Freya said fiercely. She turned to face him fully, and her hand found his on the rail between them. "You have been showing up every day for 2 weeks to do work that did not need doing because I asked you to. You are kind and honest, and you listen when I talk. You make me feel like I matter. How is that not enough?" Owen looked at their joined hands, and his fingers tightened around hers. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted. "I have never been good at the talking part, the feelings part. I am better at just doing things." "Then do things," Freya said. "Keep showing up. Keep fixing fences that do not need fixing. Keep sitting here with me. That is enough. That is more than enough." Owen lifted his gaze to meet hers, and there was something raw and vulnerable in his eyes that made Freya's breath catch. "You really want this?" he asked quietly. "You really want me?" "Yes," Freya said, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life. "I really want you." He kissed her then, careful and tentative, and Freya kissed him back with all the pent-up wanting she had been carrying for the past 2 weeks. And when they finally pulled apart, the sun was setting and the goats were bleating in the pasture, and the world felt bigger and brighter and more full of possibility than it had in a very long time. They spent the next few weeks in a kind of golden haze, caught up in the newness of it all. Owen moved into the small cottage at the edge of Freya's property, the one her father had built years ago for hired hands, and he started taking on more of the farm work, not because she asked him to, but because he wanted to, because he liked the rhythm of it, the way each day had a shape and a purpose. Freya watched him settle in and felt her heart do strange, fluttery things that she had thought were the domain of romantic ballads and not real life. "My aunt is coming to visit," Freya announced one morning over breakfast. She said it with the tone of someone delivering news of an impending natural disaster. Owen looked up from his porridge. "Is that bad?" "It depends," Freya said. "Aunt Mara is wonderful, but she is also incredibly nosy and has very strong opinions about everything. She's going to take one look at you and demand to know what your intentions are." "My intentions are to marry you," Owen said calmly. "If you will have me." Freya nearly dropped her spoon. "You cannot just say things like that out of nowhere." "Why not?" Owen asked. "It is true. I have been thinking about it for a while now. I was going to ask you properly, with a better setting and maybe some flowers or something, but if your aunt is coming, I suppose now is as good a time as any." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Freya Rowan, will you marry me?" "You are impossible," Freya said, but she was grinning so hard her face hurt. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, you ridiculous man." Owen smiled, the fullest, brightest smile she had ever seen from him, and he stood up and came around the table to kiss her properly. And Freya decided that surprise proposals over breakfast were actually vastly superior to elaborate romantic gestures, because they were real and messy and perfectly them. Aunt Mara arrived 3 days later in a whirlwind of luggage and opinions. She was a tall, broad-shouldered orc woman with silver streaks in her dark hair and a gaze that could peel paint off a barn, and she took one look at Owen and planted her hands on her hips. "So you are the man who broke the fence," Mara said. "Yes, madam," Owen said. He did not flinch under her scrutiny, which Freya had to admit was impressive. "And now you are fixing more than just fences, I take it," Mara continued. Her eyes flicked to Freya, and there was a knowing gleam in them that made Freya want to sink through the floor. "He asked me to marry him," Freya said, deciding that honesty was probably the best policy with Mara because she would ferret out the truth anyway. "I said yes." Mara's stern expression cracked into a delighted grin. "Finally! I thought you were going to dance around each other forever." She swept forward and pulled Freya into a rib-crushing hug, then did the same to Owen, who looked startled but submitted to it with good grace. "This is wonderful news. Have you set a date? Plan the hand-fasting? I can help, you know. I have organized at least a dozen weddings in my time." "We have not really talked about the details yet," Freya said, trying to extract herself from her aunt's enthusiastic embrace. "It only just happened." "Then we should start planning now," Mara declared. She bustled into the cottage, already making a mental list out loud of everything that would need to be done, and Freya and Owen exchanged a look that was half amusement and half resignation. "I like her," Owen said quietly. "She likes you too," Freya said. "Or she would not have hugged you. Mara only hugs people she approves of." Owen looked pleased by that, in his subtle, understated way, and Freya felt another surge of affection for this quiet, steady man who had walked into her life by way of a broken fence and decided to stay. Mara, true to her word, threw herself into the wedding planning with the zeal of a general organizing a campaign. She insisted on a traditional hand-fasting ceremony, to be held at the pasture fence that had started it all, because she thought it was romantic and poetic, and exactly the kind of story people would tell for years. Freya thought it was a little on the nose, but Owen seemed genuinely touched by the idea, so she agreed. "The fence is where it started," he said when Mara proposed it. "It makes sense for it to be where we make it official." The preparations took a month, because Mara refused to do anything halfway and insisted on inviting half the valley to the ceremony. Freya was surprised by how many people showed up. Neighbors and friends, and even a few travelers who had heard about the unusual wedding and wanted to see it for themselves. There were a few sideways glances, a few muttered comments about orcs and humans, but they were drowned out by the general goodwill and curiosity. And Freya decided not to let it bother her, because this was her day, hers and Owen's, and no one was going to take that away from them. The morning of the hand-fasting dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that felt like a gift from the universe. Freya dressed in a simple green gown that Mara had helped her make, and she wore a circlet of braided wheat and wildflowers in her dark hair. And when she walked out to the pasture, she saw Owen standing by the fence, looking almost unbearably handsome in a clean shirt and trousers, his hair actually combed for once. "You look beautiful," he said when she reached him, and his voice was rough with emotion. "You look pretty good yourself," Freya said, and she had to blink back tears because this was real. This was actually happening, and she had never been happier in her entire life. Mara officiated the ceremony, because of course she did, and she spoke about love and partnership and the importance of fixing what you broke, which made several people in the crowd laugh and Owen duck his head with a sheepish smile. They exchanged vows, simple and heartfelt, and Owen's hands were steady as he bound the ribbon around their wrists, tying them together in the old tradition. "I promise to show up," Owen said, his dark eyes locked on hers. "Every day for the rest of my life. I promise to listen when you talk, to work beside you, to be the partner you deserve. I promise to love you, Freya, in all the ways I know how and all the ways I am still learning." "I promise to let you show up," Freya said, and her voice shook a little. "I promise to trust you, to build a life with you, to laugh with you and argue with you and grow old beside you. I promise to love you, Owen, not because you owe me a husband, but because you chose to be mine and I choose to be yours." Mara pronounced them bound, and the crowd cheered, and Owen kissed Freya with a tenderness that made her heart feel too big for her chest, and when they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "Thank you for keeping me." "Thank you for staying," Freya whispered back. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and drink and music, and Freya danced with Owen under the stars, his arms around her waist and her head on his shoulder. And she thought about the absurd way this had all started, with a runaway cart and a broken fence, and a joke that had turned into something real and precious and entirely hers. Later, when the guests had gone home and the night was quiet, Freya and Owen stood by the fence together, the same fence that had brought them together, and Freya ran her hand along the smooth wood that Owen had mended with his own hands. "It is a good fence," she said. "It is a great fence," Owen agreed. He slipped his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. "Best fence I have ever built." "You know the funny thing," Freya said, looking up at him in the moonlight. "I think I would have fallen for you even if you had not broken the fence. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe we would have met some other way, but I think I still would have ended up here. With you." "I think you are right," Owen said. He turned to face her fully, cupping her cheek in his hand. "But I am still glad it happened the way it did, because it gave me a reason to show up that first day, and the second day, and every day after that. It gave me a reason to stay when I might have just kept moving. I am glad you stayed, Freya said. She rose up on her toes to kiss him, slow and sweet, and the goats bleated softly in the pasture behind them, and the fence stood strong and sturdy, a testament to what could be built when you took the time to fix what was broken. Over the following months, the rhythm of their life together became something comfortable and easy. Owen expanded the pasture, building new sections of fence with Freya's help, and they bought more goats to fill the space, and the herd grew fat and healthy under their joint care. Freya taught Owen how to milk the goats and make cheese, and he taught her how to split logs and mend harnesses, and they learned each other's skills and habits and all the small, intimate details that made up a shared life. Winter came, cold and sharp, and they spent the evenings by the fire, Owen whittling small figures out of wood while Freya spun wool and told him stories about her childhood, about her parents who had passed years ago and left her the farm, about her dreams of making it something bigger and better. Owen listened the way he always did, with his full attention, and sometimes he would add a quiet comment or observation that showed he had been listening not just to her words, but to the meaning behind them. I want children someday, Freya said one night, the words spilling out into the warm, firelit quiet. Is that something you want too? Owen looked up from his whittling and his expression was thoughtful. I do, he said after a moment. I think I would like that very much. A family, roots. Something to build toward. Good, Freya said, and she felt a swell of relief and anticipation all at once. I am glad we agree on that. Spring came, and with it the soft green of new growth and the busy work of lambing season, and Freya realized one morning that she was pregnant. She told Owen over breakfast, the same way he had proposed to her, and he went very still and then very carefully set down his fork and came around the table to kneel beside her chair. Are you sure? He asked, and his voice was full of wonder. I am sure, Freya said. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, which was still flat but would not be for long. We are going to have a baby, Owen. He kissed her then, fierce and joyful, and when he pulled back there were tears in his eyes. I am going to be a father, he said, like he was testing the words out, seeing how they felt. I am going to be a father. You are going to be a wonderful father, Freya said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The pregnancy was not easy, but it was not terrible either. Freya was sick in the mornings for the first few months, and Owen hovered anxiously until she told him to stop fussing. But even then, he found small ways to take care of her, making her tea and rubbing her feet in the evenings and talking to her belly when he thought she was asleep. Mara came to visit again and pronounced herself delighted with the news, and she stayed for a month to help prepare, sewing tiny clothes and offering advice that was only occasionally useful. The baby came in late autumn, on a day when the leaves were turning gold and red, and the air smelled like wood smoke and apples. The labor was long and hard, and Freya cursed Owen's name more than once, but he stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And when the midwife finally placed the squalling, red-faced baby in her arms, Freya felt her entire world shift and realign around this tiny, perfect creature. It is a boy, the midwife said, smiling. A healthy boy. Xander, Freya said, looking down at her son. She had decided on the name weeks ago, and it fit him perfectly. His name is Xander. Owen touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, and Xander's fingers closed around it instinctively. Hello, Xander, Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. I am your father. I am going to do my best by you, I promise. Xander wailed in response, which seemed fair, and Freya laughed through her exhaustion and pulled Owen down to kiss him. We made this, she said. We made him. Can you believe it? No, Owen said honestly. But I am so glad we did. Xander grew quickly, as babies do, and he was a happy, curious child with his father's dark eyes and his mother's green-tinged skin and a smile that could light up a room. Owen doted on him shamelessly, carrying him around the farm on his shoulders and teaching him the names of all the animals before he could even walk. And Freya watched the two of them together and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. 2 years later, their second son arrived, and they named him Victor. He was quieter than Xander, more thoughtful, but just as loved, and the cottage filled with the noise and chaos of a growing family. Freya expanded the cheese-making operation, selling her wares at the market in the nearby town, and Owen built a new barn to house the expanding herd, and their farm became known throughout the valley as a place of good work and honest dealings. More children followed over the years, each one a blessing and a challenge in equal measure. They had 5 in total, 3 boys and 2 girls, and the cottage was never quiet and never boring and exactly the kind of full, bustling home that Freya had always dreamed of. Owen was patient and steady with all of them, teaching them how to work with their hands and how to be kind, and how to show up for the people they loved. And Freya loved him more with each passing year, loved the way he had grown into this role, the way he had become the foundation their entire family was built on. One evening, when the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Freya and Owen walked out to the pasture fence, the way they often did when they needed a moment of peace. The fence had been repaired and replaced, and expanded so many times over the years that almost none of the original wood remained, but it still held the same significance, still marked the place where their story had begun. You ever think about that day? Freya asked, leaning against the fence rail. When you crashed the cart and I told you that you owed me a husband, all the time, Owen said. He slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. It was the luckiest unlucky day of my life. Mine too, Freya said. She looked out at the pasture, at the goats grazing peacefully in the moonlight, at the barn Owen had built and the cottage where their children slept, and she felt a bone-deep satisfaction with the life they had made together. I was joking, you know, when I said it. I never expected you to take me seriously. I know, Owen said, but I am glad I did. I am glad I showed up that next morning and kept showing up. I am glad you let me stay. I am glad you stayed too, Freya said. She turned in his arms to face him, and she could see the silver starting to thread through his dark hair, the lines at the corners of his eyes, all the small signs of the years they had lived together. I love you, Owen Naylor. I love the life we have built. I love our children and our farm and our ridiculous, wonderful, perfect story. I love you too, Owen said, and he kissed her under the stars, the same way he had on their wedding day, with all the tenderness and devotion he had been showing her in 1,000 small ways every day since. I love you, Freya, always. They stood there together by the fence for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, and above them the stars wheeled slowly across the sky, and the goats settled down to sleep. And in the cottage, their children dreamed safe dreams, and the fence stood strong and steady, holding it all together the way it always had, a testament to what could be built when you took the time to fix what was broken and turned a joke into a promise and a promise into a life.